Holmes once told me on a rainy London afternoon, "No one is convicted faster than a blonde woman at a funeral, but without a tear." I never forgot that line, and it came back to me clearly when I first saw the photo of Darlie Routier, a 26-year-old woman with dyed blonde hair wearing a white tank top and red lipstick. She stood by the graves of her 2 young sons, spraying silly string, the silly party toy used at birthday parties, into the air. Surrounding her were balloons, cakes, and shattered laughter amidst the cemetery. The American media didn't need anything more. They got what they wanted: the silly string mom, the mother who sprayed toys on her child's grave. No sorrow, no regrets, only a smile. And so, in the eyes of the public, she was convicted. I have attended many trials with Holmes. He always paid attention to the jury's gaze when the defendant walked into the courtroom. In the Darlie case, it was the gaze of a country that had already set the table for a feast of prejudice. A beautiful woman, breast lift, makeup meticulously, wearing shorts, and, oh my God, there's a video of her laughing by the grave. No one remembers that. On that morning, Darlie attended a 2-hour memorial service for her children, reading prayers, crying, and praying. That part was not broadcast on television. The segment that the camera chose was the last 4 minutes. The sound of music, the sound of silly string, and the whispered judgment of a nation. Holmes once said, "People don't judge by evidence, Watson, but by intuition led by the media." In a society where femininity is defined by gentleness and tears, Darlie failed the moment she stepped out of the hospital with a cut on her neck. She didn't cry the right way, not speaking in the right tone, not dressed in the proper attire of a grieving mother. Instead of being asked, "Are you the victim?" she was asked, "Why are you still wearing mascara?" I do not claim that Darlie Routier is innocent. Holmes would not allow any conclusion without all the facts. But I know one thing. In this case, appearances became the first verdict. From the living room in Rowlett, Texas, to the national TV screen, justice is shaped by expressions, not by the forensic scalpel. And the question that Holmes left after reviewing the cemetery footage was this: Watson, the scary thing is not that she smiled. The scary thing is that all of us, the outsiders, believe we understand someone else's pain just through a 4-minute clip. But if appearances are the first verdict, then the evidence at the scene is the decisive accusation. And as Holmes once said, time does not lie. So was the timeline that night really tight enough for Darlie to kill her child, clean the scene, stab herself, and then call 911 as if she had just woken up? We will consider that together in the next part. No one can be both the perpetrator, the victim, and the witness, unless time itself bends. Holmes said that when we were reconstructing the timeline of the Darlie Routier case together, the incident occurred in the early hours of June 6th, 1990. Devon, 6 years old, and Damon, 5 years old, were sleeping on the ground floor sofa with their mother. Her husband, Darren, was sleeping upstairs with the newborn baby. Then the 911 call came in at 2:31 a.m. In sobbing and panicked cries, Darlie was both calling for her husband and saying, "Someone stabbed my children. Blood everywhere. I don't know what's happening." When the police arrived, the scene looked like it was cut straight out of a nightmare. Blood spilled from the chair onto the floor, along the hallway, and even into the kitchen sink. Devon died on the spot. Damon, stabbed multiple times in the back, was still alive when the police arrived, but died on the way to the hospital. I remember Holmes standing in a similar scene, his eyes sweeping lightly over the walls, ceiling, and bloodstains, then asking a single question: how many minutes did it take to do this? That is the crux of the Darlie Routier case. According to the forensic doctor, Damon, with his fatal wounds, could only survive a maximum of 8 or 9 minutes after being stabbed. But Darlie called 911 and was on the phone with the dispatcher for 5 minutes and 44 seconds without hanging up. This only leaves more than 2 minutes for all of the following, assuming she is the perpetrator. Stab the 2 children to death. Stabbing oneself, a cut on the neck nearly severed the carotid artery. Disrupt the crime scene, overturn the vacuum cleaner, break the glass, and knock over furniture. Using a kitchen knife to cut the window screen, creating a fake break-in scene. Run to 5 meters through the alley to place the blood-soaked socks of the 2 children in the back alley. Then come back. Call 911 yourself and stay on the line for nearly 6 minutes without hanging up. Holmes would call it Houdini's timeless plan. The prosecution believes that she did everything within that time frame. They argued that the cut on the neck was not deep enough, just a wound created to elicit sympathy, they said. But the doctor confirmed it was only 2 millimeters away from the carotid artery, and she needed more than 80 stitches all over her neck, arms, and chest. A mother stabbing herself like that, with the presence of mind to stage a fake scene, hide all the blood, and call 911 immediately without stuttering. That's a bold hypothesis. I remember Holmes once said, "Coincidence is something that the accuser often relies on more than the accused. What concerns him the most is not the knife, or the blood, or the silly string, but time, and the internal clock of a person." Darlie, according to her testimony and the recorded call, woke up when her son Damon pushed her shoulder. She said she saw a shadowy figure running away. She doesn't remember clearly, and that, to Holmes, was not evidence of deceit, but a classic manifestation of a victim with acute brain injury, blood loss, and panic. However, justice is not always guided by logic. Sometimes it is driven by emotion, and in Darlie's case, that emotion was shaped by a 4-minute tape, a blood-soaked sock, and an investigation that, according to Holmes, sought confirmation, not truth. And so, we come to what may have killed her last chance of survival: a video by her child's grave, a comment about breast implants, and an accusation not based on blood, but on prejudice. I'll tell you about that in the next part. A case is not always decided by knives and blood, but by something more fragile: images. Holmes whispered that line while watching the tape that the prosecutor played 8 times during the Darlie Routier trial. On June 14th, 996, exactly on the 7th birthday of Devon, the son who had died just over a week earlier, Darlie and her family held a memorial at his grave. There was cake, balloons, prayers, and a can of silly string. They recorded a video, and the last few minutes, when Darlie smiled and playfully sprayed the plastic, became the most important evidence in the murder case. Not the bloodstains, not a fingerprint, but rather a smile. Holmes told me, "No one laughs at the cemetery innocently, but no one cries for more hours a day either." In fact, the morning footage, where Darlie and the pastor prayed in tears, placed flowers on the grave, and held hands with her youngest son, Drake, standing silently, was never shown to the jury. They only saw silly string. The media sensationalized the indifferent mother. The prosecutor calls it evidence of psychological disorder. And in the eyes of the jury, it raised a deadly question. A normal mother, why would she smile like that right after her child died? Holmes didn't laugh, nor did he condemn. He simply said, "We should not judge others, just because their sorrow is different from ours." The trap here is that we want the main character to react like a template, crying, writhing, collapsing. But suffering is a complex creature. It can transform into tears or laughter. It can be silent, or it can burst out through every unconscious action, like lighting a candle, hanging a balloon, or even spraying silly string in desperation. When Holmes analyzed the video, he noticed Darlie's gaze. It was not a cold gaze, but rather a fragmented gaze, out of sync between what was happening and the unacceptable. The death sentence, pronounced by the jury, did not come after DNA analysis or the discovery of a weapon with unusual traces. It came after 8 times reviewing the silly string tape, a trial more emotional than rational. Holmes closed his eyes, contemplative. "I once saw a real murderer weep bitterly in court, and I once saw a grieving mother forcing a smile at the funeral." We cannot rely on gestures to define the truth, so if emotions are misunderstood, evidence is contradictory, and testimonies are distorted, then what else kept Darlie on death row for 24 years? Holmes told me, "At that time the case wasn't over yet, Watson. It was just temporarily asleep, waiting for a clue." And that clue, strangely enough, did not appear at the crime scene, but from an unmatched fingerprint, a blood-soaked sock, and a timeline that could not have happened if Darlie were the perpetrator. I'll tell you more in the next part. Watson, this case is not just about what is brought to light, but also what is deliberately kept in the dark. Holmes said that while reviewing the case files, he found a detail that almost everyone had overlooked: a sock 3 houses away from the crime scene. It wasn't an ordinary sock. It is Darlie's husband's sock with 2 bloodstains, one from Devon, one from Damon. And it was found in the alley behind the house, discovered early that morning. The police believe Darlie took the sock, ran 3 houses down to throw it away, then came back. All in just 4 minutes, Holmes frowned. This is not a calculation. This is an illusion of time. Because Damon, the younger child, was still alive when the medical staff arrived, and Darlie called 911 immediately afterward and did not leave the house during the more than 5-minute call. How could she have run, covered in blood, past the neighbors, come back, injured herself, and staged the scene in such a short amount of time? But that's not all. During the investigation, an unidentified fingerprint was found at the scene. It did not match Darlie, her husband, or the rescue personnel. And guess what? It has never been cross-referenced with the national database. Holmes sat in silence. I remember the look in his eyes when he saw that fingerprint scan, as if he were looking at an invisible person in the crowded room. "Evidence doesn't always disappear," he said. "Sometimes it's still there, just being refused to be heard." You might ask, why didn't anyone investigate that sock more thoroughly? Why wasn't that strange fingerprint traced? And why was all the contradictory evidence ignored? Holmes has a hypothesis, and it doesn't involve the knife, but rather emotions. A young, beautiful mother, once a cheerleader, seen as too perfect to be honest, too calm to be innocent. From then on, everything she did, from bandaging wounds to calling for help, was viewed through the lens of suspicion. And then there was one more thing that made Holmes unable to leave this case: the husband, Darlie Routier. Holmes asked, what if someone wanted to stage a break-in to clear an insurance debt? What then? I was surprised, but he found a statement from an old friend, where Darlie had asked to arrange a fake robbery. Then there was the insurance, then the overdue loan, then how Darlie was represented by Darlie's own lawyer, creating a conflict of interest that the jury was unaware of. Holmes said, justice cannot be a game of wits between sentiment and censored testimony. But, Watson, what keeps me awake is not the sock or the trace, but it is a question that no one dares to answer. That question, I will tell you in the final part. It's not meant to end the story, but to make you question everything again. Watson, Holmes once said, sometimes the cruelest thing is not the knife, but leaving a conclusion hanging that no one dares to decide. 23 years. That was the time Darly Routier lived. Not lived. Every morning when she wakes up, she faces a question that no one can answer. When is the last day? No sentence has been carried out. No execution date has been set. No process has truly come to an end. There is only a clock, rusty and silent, counting down the years of a woman who is no longer called a mother, nor seen as a murderer with compelling evidence. I still remember Holmes jotting down in his notebook, America is famous for its speed and decisiveness, but with Darlie, it is delay and forgetfulness. Why? That question, if you turn to the judicial system, will not be easy to answer. People say, this is a system that ensures justice, so appeals take time. This is a very serious crime, so she cannot be released. This is a very sensitive case, so it can't be retried yet. Holmes smirked. Or is this a dilemma, where no one wants to take responsibility if it was wrong from the start? Throughout those years of waiting, Darlie became a figure that both the press and American society were hesitant about. No one dares to call her innocent, but fewer and fewer people dare to say that the death sentence is convincing. She was once offered, if you confess to the crime, you will avoid the death penalty. She refused. I will not accept what I have not done just to live in silence and shame. Holmes once told me on a rainy night in Boston, Watson, justice cannot operate if we punish someone for stubbornness rather than for guilt. Because Darlie's story is no longer just about a family who lost a child or a sentence from 1996. It is a test, silent yet harsh, for an entire nation. When the sentence has been questioned, no one dares to withdraw it. When people don't want to prosecute again because they fear, what if she is really innocent? And if she is executed, will history have to add another name to the list of wrongfully executed? Holmes wrote in the case file, I am not sure Darly Routier is innocent. But I am sure of one thing. Justice cannot be served through hesitation, doubt, and a system afraid to admit mistakes. We left Texas that afternoon. Holmes didn't say anything the entire long journey. It wasn't until the sun had completely set that he let out a soft sigh. I have seen many deaths, but perhaps the coldest death of all is when a person is imprisoned in silence by the world. And what Holmes said that day still haunts me to this day. She might be convicted, but America is on trial.